Calamari Salutations everyone, Squid here bringing you another episode of the Power Rankings. Week 3 for this one. I know it's a bit late, but there were some issues with recording and editing, and well, here we are today. Flying solo. Braves had some issues in his real life. We wish him all the best, and hopefully he will join us back up next week. So, without further ado, we'll start off with the newest coach in the league, in the 16th position. It's the Cold Summer Assassins, and they lost this week to the 6th Street Viper, 1-2. Very close match that went to timer because they couldn't battle on LAN. Really close at the end, where an unfortunate paralysis kind of stripped the win to Souza. But the thing is, they did have really bad matchup, and I still liked what I saw. Souza brought some very interesting sets, very unconventional. They caught me off guard as much as they caught Sharky off guard, and that Cramorant being Specs definitely put in some crazy amount of work. The thing is, I can't justify putting Souza above the other teams yet, because I'm basing this off only one match. So if the Cold Summer Assassins, even though losing, keep a consistent performance where they keep it close until the end, I probably will bump them up just a tiny bit, but we still can't forget that this was the team that started off the league looking pretty shaky. So based off only this week's performance, I'm not gonna bump them up. But next up we have the Andar Teddy Ursas, and they lost 0-6 this week. When you lose 0-6, you're never going to look good. That's why they dropped off a spot this week. That's 10 growth. So sometimes the game just decides that you won't win, and no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you just don't win because the game just doesn't let you. And that's basically what happened to that 10 growth. I felt so sorry for Fuego because you hate to see it. It's just nothing you could do at that point. Once the 10 growth died, basically it was GG. The matchup with the Heracross on the opposing side was already pretty bad, and once the 10 growth went down to those unfortunate paralysis, there just wasn't anything left for Fuego to do. That said, still like that he brought the Latios scarfed for two reasons. First reason, and most important one, is that he finally changed the item on the Latios, and changing items is always useful because people won't know what to expect from you. If you consistently bring the same item on the Latios being the choice specs, people will start to notice the trend and try to counter it. And the second reason I like Latios is basically that he brought it scarfed to outspeed the Spectrier. The speed control was really needed to hit that Spectrier, and I like that decision about him. That said, the deficits on his team really start to show up in some of these matches where there isn't just much that he can do to counter the opponent because of some glaring weaknesses his team has. I think he's still utilizing his team to a pretty good level, so I'd encourage you to try to go ahead and be somewhat creative. You've brought already some creative sets like the Golurk, and I think you can take it one step up, and hopefully that will manage to get you a win. So really hoping for that. Next up we have the Philadelphia Melmetal's at 14th spot, and they lost a 1-2 match to the Trashtown Thieves. So there's some issues to address here. So I know that Cherry wasn't happy with the comments that were made in the clean sweep video. The things that were said in the video weren't said with ill intent. And the thing is, when a team is constantly losing, that means that team will have many opportunities to learn and to try to improve the plays they are making. I think you are good enough of a player that will eventually get a win on the board. But until you get a win on the board, we can't justify that you are playing well. That said, how can you improve upon what you are making? While people are criticizing Cherry for utilizing stall this match, I think the Jellicent was actually the way that he won the match. Since Bishmi had no way to break through it, the Jellicent could just sit on the field, try to ship things continuously, and eventually Bishmi would run out of options to face the Jellicent. I really liked seeing the Jellicent put in this amount of work, and it serves as a message that people shouldn't underestimate Jellicent's bulk and its ability to wall. There's still some things that can be improved upon. The Archeops, you can start seeing now the flaws that the Archeops has. When you attack with it and then you suffer damage, it's basically dead weight because it's in defeatist range. By the way, I'd like to see Jolteon in future matches, because Jolteon is an offensive option that you can explore, and it still hasn't come to a match. And looking at your team, there's not that many offensive options besides the walls you have. That's why people are referring to your team as being a little more stally, a little more wally, because if you compare offensive stats around the league, your team is one of the lowest offensive stats. That's why people are saying your team is stall. That said, playing stall isn't bad. It looks bad on the opponent because they are mentally getting wrecked slowly but surely with stall teams, and that just takes a toll on the opponents. Playing stall isn't bad or good, it's just a playstyle, and playstyles should be respected, whether they are offensive and whether they are defensive. You could argue that Wolfie Glick, one of the best players in the Pokemon scene, likes to play stall, and people don't really criticize him for that. It's just playing for stall, playing for position is a very good playstyle, and it's often difficult to counter. So at the end of the day, you play to win. Whether that is stall, whether that is other playstyle, it's up to you, and it's up mostly to the team that you have. Now we're moving on into a team that's basically the opposite playstyle. Hyper offensive, the Calexico Blazikens finally won their first match against Sidon with some impressive hyper offensive play that netted the win with the 2-0. Evidenced in this match was the Charizard. The Charizard wrecked Sidon's team, tanking Moonblast from Tapu Lele, KOing Noivern with hitting double hurricanes, hitting the Scorching Sand on the Heatran that was crucial for him to win the match in the late game. Yeah, so the Calexico Blazikens looked a lot more impressive this week. That said, there's still two things that would have done differently. First thing is not sacking the Zapdos early game, because the Zapdos wrecks Sidon's team like for real. Sidon can't switch in on the Zapdos ever. The second thing I would have done differently is have Flash Cannon on the Hydreigon, because there could be a late game situation where I needed to hit the Tapu Lele super effectively, and Flash Cannon could have made the difference there in that late game scenario. That said, well played to Sen, first win on the board. Now just continue from here. Next up we have the Brisbane Rillaboomers at rank 12, and they lost 0-4 to Lucas. And the match didn't look good exclusively for one reason in my point of view, in that Justin just gave up on the match too early. There's those times where you just don't have confidence in yourself to make the correct plays, but the thing is, Justin, you are a good enough of a player that you can make those plays. And I've seen the way that you played the first game of the season, and that to me says that you are good enough of a player that can go toe-to-toe even with the toughest of the opponents. Lucas is a step above the rest of the division at this point, but that doesn't mean that you can't win. The Araquanid really did try to bring the match home, but unfortunately he couldn't counter the Entei enough, so that Entei stood on the field way too much longer for you to try to pressure it out, and unfortunately you lost too much before the Araquanid was able to KO it, and that meant that you didn't have enough gas on the tank. That said, you probably could have pivoted your mons correctly to have the Araquanid earlier on the field and probably be able to KO that Entei way earlier than it was done. Have confidence on yourself, don't chastise yourself if you lose a mon way early in the match. Sometimes matches begin 5 to 6 because you basically lose a mon on your first turn and you still are able to win, so don't count yourself out until the last stages of the match. So at the 11th spot we have the Sydney Six, and they lost 0-2 to the Calexico Blazicans this week. They tried to counter hyper offensive with some hyper offensive of their own. The Tapu Lele was basically trying to carry the team on its back. Tapu Lele in this match really showed why it's banned so many times, because it managed to grab the 4 kills of his team with a Choice Scarf set that was really well fought for this match. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough for the win to come home for the Sixes. Sacking the Noivern at that point probably wasn't the best play, but I mean, there still wasn't that much that could deal with the Charizard, so I kind of understand that. Different approach next time you face hyper offensive could be what you need. Maybe a Shuka on the hit run would have been nice for the ground coverage that San would have wanted to run. Just some ideas that could have been done differently in the match. And by the way, this match really showed why I don't like Celebi that much, because it was basically dead to a U-turn and it basically got knocked off earlier. It's 2 coverage moves that are pretty common in the meta game. Celebi is hit super effectively by both of those. I don't know, maybe consider trading it out? At the end of the day, if you like the Celebi, just keep it. It's still a pretty good mod. It's more personal preference than anything else. So at number 10 we have the Rasboros City Rejects, and this week the Rejects got wrecked by a Kommo-o. That Kommo-o just sat on the field doing whatever it wanted, and Arts didn't have an answer for it. The Rillaboom really tried to bring the match back late game with that, I believe it was Choice Scarf set, but the damage was already done. There wasn't much that Arts could have done at that point of the match. That said, I think he made a pretty big mistake in not bringing Hazard Control. So his only Hazard Control is Crobat, okay? But the thing is, Toxic Spikes played so much of a role this match where things were getting continually chipped as Sven was setting up on his side of the field. Arts were slowly bleeding out and eventually the Kommo just wrecked. So there's not much else to say. The Kommo wrecked Arts, and let's see how that Orbital does from this point onwards in the league, because he grabbed it. I'm really excited to see how he utilizes it. So in the number 9 spot we have the 6th Streets Viper, and they won 2-1 against the Cold Summer Assassins. There's some interesting things to say about this match. Sharky did have a pretty good matchup, and the match, in my opinion, was way closer than it should have been. Barraskewda was banded, and I think the first time that it entered the field, if instead of clicking Flip Turn it clicked Liquidation, that's basically a KO there. And maybe he was still trying to play position based because it was still early in the match, but at the end of the day, if you can claim a KO with your Barraskewda on the field, just claim it. It's probably best to put your opponent at the numbers disadvantage than just play for momentum by itself, because if you want to grab momentum, but you want to do something with your momentum. So if you're just keeping on grabbing momentum, eventually you have to use it and not just keep it, because momentum is only good if you use it on the match. And the flip turn was eventually the play where instead of clicking flip turn, you could have used liquidation to transfer the momentum you gained in the match into something concrete, like KOing the Jirachi at that point. And even if Souza switched out to the Decidueye or something like that, you still have pretty good answers against that in the Zapdos, so you still could have dealt with what the opponent wanted to switch in on it. That said, a win is a win, so I can't penalize you too much for it. Another thing I would like to address is that even though Arts and Bishmi joked with you in the previous video, they did have a point in which there's a thought process while building the team, and if that thought process isn't transferred into battle, then there isn't much consistency in the team building process and the battling process. And when these two are disconnected, you're probably gonna suffer a lot more in the battle than you should. It's very important that you keep consistency in the way that you team build, and then transfer those ideas that you brought in, that you thought about in team building, and execute them in battle. And that's pretty much what they were trying to say, even though they were doing so jokingly. So that's still some pretty good piece of advice. I'm hoping on you to improve on that consistency between team building and executing the battle plan. Next up we have Aldra and Miami Heatmore sitting at 1 and 2 now after they lost to the Austin Taurus. So about this match, Aldra really did try to do something with the Rosalia to counter what Sully wanted to do, and they did so pretty convincingly, I'd say, because that Rosalia did wall the Sceptile to a certain degree. But the thing is, at the end of the day, they only lost to some hacks, because if the Leaf Blade didn't crit on the Garchomp, they probably would have won the game, and that's kind of the story of Aldra so far in the league. There's some crucial piece of rolls that don't go in his favor, and he ends up losing the match. It's twice in a row now, so that said, twice in a row isn't enough for me to justify putting him way below, because he's still playing his matches to a really high level. But I'm really looking on him to bounce back and get a really convincing win next week to show us how good of a player he definitely is. And even with him being 1 and 2, don't count Aldra out. He's one of those coaches that can beat any team of the league in any given day. So at number 7 is a player that really improved upon his ranking this week. He is starting to play really amazingly. It's the 3 Electrons and Sven, and the way he utilized the Komo set this week was just beautifully done. First, he took advantage of the lack of removal on the opponent's team to basically set up the Toxic Spikes early game. The Toxic Spikes were really important because that meant that while the Komoa was setting up the substitutes and the Iron defenses, the opponent was still taking damage. And it's just beautiful prep on Sven's part, making sure that the game-winning set synergizes really well with the way he built his team. That said, there's still a specific turn in the match where Sven really did impress me, which was the turn where the Komoa was sitting in front of the Glalie the first time, and Sven kept his head cool and just had the steel nerves to switch out the Komoa, because he knew the Komoa will later down the line win him the match. And that's just really impressive to know that even though you are set up and you have your win condition on the field, there's some percentage plays that don't grab you the win. And he decided to play it safe and capitalize on that to make sure the win was 100% guaranteed. So props to Sven for pulling that out. Like he said to his opponent, he could have easily followed the match if he stayed in, but he went, instead of going for the 90% play, he went for the 100% play, and I can only congratulate him for that, even if that play wasn't that obvious to make. So next up we have the Immunity Idols and Coach Mountay. Mountay did really good this match, although helped by the game deciding to paralyze that 10 growth like billion turns in this match. That said, Mountay did have a good team. he had the matchup advantage, and the way he built his Guts Heracross with Wish support from the Odino was pretty cool to see, because that basically meant that the Heracross would stay in the match as long as Mount wanted him to, and the thing is, Mount really wanted the Heracross to stay until the end of the match, because the Heracross just wrecked through the Teddy Ursa's team. The mon that cleaned up late game was actually Silvally, and that's why Silvally is highlighted. We also have to give props to Mount because he's the first coach to grab a 6-0 this season, so congratulations to you. And watch out for those Assault Vested 10 growths with Leech Seed and Toxic, yeah? So at number 5 we have my good buddy Southside Braves from the Nashville Nidokings, and they dropped a few spots this week because they lost to the Cerulean City Mewtwo, and the thing is, there's some things that I think Braves could have done differently. You're seeing the Mungas on the field, and I've talked about the Munga set in the Clean Sweep episode. I would rather have seen a Rocky Helmet with Regenerator Mungas. The thing is, Dracovish was always going to go nuts on this match for using the Amungas with Rocky Helmet, was getting 20% HP chip on the Dracovish, and that could mean the difference between revenging it with something or not. The Rocky Helmet in this match would have been amazing because it would have chipped also the Whimsicott, who couldn't freely U-turn on it, and even to some extent the Milotic, that wouldn't have gotten the paralysis from the effect spore, and because of that wouldn't have got the boost from the Marvel scale. That said, the Amunga still put in an amazing amount of work, and basically when things went south for Southside Braves was when the Amungas went down, because at that point the rest of his team wasn't able to check pretty much the opposing team, and that meant that he just didn't have enough gas on the tank. The Shelgon really did try to put in some work at the end of the game, but his opponent was well prepared for it. Yeah, after that there's not much else that Braves could have done. Still, he played quite well and he lost to a pretty good opponent, so I didn't penalize him that much for it. Next up, we have the Trash Town Filials, one of the 3 undefeated teams in the league at this point, and that Bolton put in an amazing amount of work, but because it didn't have Thunderfang, it just couldn't break the Jellicent. It's just the unfortunate reality of it. Without the Thunderfang, there's no way the Bishmi could have done more to the Jellicent. Bishmi was quite lucky with his Scorch in the match, and I think the only way he could have broken the Jellicent was basically keeping Scorch alive to whenever the Jellicent was remaining on the opposing side of the field, hit the Fire Lash once and then just try to beat the Jellicent with the defense drop, with Bolton taking advantage of it. I think Bishmi really did underprepare for that Jellicent, and he basically only managed to get the win because of some mistakes that the opponent did. And it's not the first time that Bishmi isn't that convincing in his wins, and although he's one of the 3 teams that's undefeated in the league right now, I decided to put another team that's not undefeated above him, because that team has shown more consistent performances even in his loss, and that team is the Cerulean City Mewtwo. They won 4-0 this week against the Nashville Nidokings, as I said, and the Dracovish had a really good matchup because there weren't any water absorbers on the opposing side of the field, so I think that Luke Harry always had the advantage in this match. I really liked the Mew set setting up. It could have done more than it did because unfortunately it got critted by the Crawdont. The thing is, the crit didn't matter that much to the end result. It might have mattered for differential, because if the Aqua Jet from the Crawdont doesn't crit, basically Azumarill had Aqua Jet, so it could come in on the field and just clean up after that. But really seeing Adrenaline Orb Mew utilized to get the speed advantage from the Intimidate of Landorus was a pretty good tech, and one of the many things that Luke Harry did right in his prep this week. The other thing he did very right this week was bringing 2 Haze Mons, Golbat and Milotic, and I think he only won because he had Haze on both of those 2 mods. because without that, Shelvan could have set up like 2 or 3 Dragon Dances and eventually outsped the rest of the enemy team and basically win from there, because Milotic could have taken one of those, but it didn't have the Ice Beam to revenge it back. So props to Luke Harry, his prep was amazing this week and there's not much else to say. So in the number 2 we have the Hellblaze Volcaronas and Lucas. And Lucas is looking really threatening by the week. He's rolled over his opponents 3 times in a row, and basically when it happens once, okay, it can be attributed to a specific set. When it happens twice, you start to wonder, and when it happens 3 times, okay, this guy is definitely legit. And Lucas has been dominating his opponents, and he has dominated his opponents so hard, it doesn't feel like he's going in depth with his builds. He's just scratching the surface of what he can do with his team. This week, he basically had the really good boy that sat on the field way longer than it should have. It's the Entei. The Entei was amazing. I love Entei. I really like to see it utilized this week, and props to him because that set was amazing and it did a lot of work on the opponent's team. Really well played by Lucas, really dominating this start of the season, and I look forward to what the next weeks bring, because I think this team could be undefeated by the end of the season. And last but not least, we have Sully Mumble and the Austin Torres. Our champ is still doing champ things, although it did look a little bit scary this week. If that Leaf Blade hadn't critted, maybe he couldn't have gotten the win, but props to him. Leaf Blade does have a really high chance of critting, 12.5%, so it's 1 in 8. It's a 1 in 8 chance to win, and he got it. So the Austin Torres dominated with the Sceptile once again. Doing it once, you'd expect that opponents are prepared for it. Doing it twice though, yeah. It just shows how good Sully is. He's really been amazing the start of the season. He's 3-0. I don't see anyone on his division really beating him at this point. It's one of those cases where until I see it happen, I doubt it will. It's just on the remaining coaches of the division to really prove me wrong, because I'm not really expecting Sully to lose this early. Yeah. So this is basically the standings for this week from the power rankings. The Austin Torres still sitting in the first place. The 3 Leckitrons have the highest rise of the week, while the Nashville Little Kings have had the highest downfall of the week. Yeah, so these are the changes to the second part of the power rankings. 6 Streets the Viper on the 9th spot, and the Cold Summer Assassins still trying to climb out of the last spot. So this is it for this week, guys. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and really wish all the best to Braves, because he deserves it. Yeah, so Squid, jetting out.